everybody, Stephanie here from Instant Pot Basics and Beyond. We're going to do something a little bit different today. I wanted to make cauliflower soup, and I found a recipe I really liked, and it's just like a regular make it on the stovetop sort of thing, and I was like, we're going to do it in the Instant Pot. This is actually a roasted cauliflower soup, and so you actually are supposed to roast off the cauliflower in the oven, then transfer it to a pot, simmer it on the stove for a little bit. While I'm sure the flavor is amazing, I love roasted cauliflower, I just didn't want to deal with it. So we're going to do the Instant Pot. So we're going to start by turning our pot on to saute. So I got a fairly large head of cauliflower just because I got a family that likes to eat. And just like roughly chopped it up. I mean, we got, you know, pieces about this big. Just chop it up. So we're going to, since we're not, oh, that one's too big. Since we're not going to roast it, I'm going to do some sauteing in the Instant Pot just to give it a little bit of color, add a little bit more flavor. The raw cauliflower on its own, while I'm sure is great, is not as amazing as roasted. So we're going to pour in a tablespoon-ish of olive oil. We're going to let this get hot. And I'm going to do this in 2 batches. If I try to throw this all in at once, we're not going to achieve what we're looking for. It's just going to kind of steam, and that's not what we want. If we wanted it to steam, we just throw it all in there and cook it. So we're going to let this get hot just for a minute. The other thing we're doing today, because again, we want fast meals, right? Like that's kind of the point. So when we go to add the broth, which I'll also tell you about in a minute, I got it warmed up. I stuck it in the microwave, got it warmed up just to kind of help it come up to pressure faster. While this is heating, I'll tell you another thing. So I don't buy chicken stock, chicken broth. Sometimes I make it, and actually usually if I make it, then I am just making chicken noodle soup with it, or I'll keep it maybe in smaller quantities. But if I need something like this calls for 4 cups, I'm not going to go buy a carton of chicken stock. I keep better than bouillon in my fridge. There's chicken, there's beef, and there's vegetable, whatever you want to call it. Which honestly you could do with this. It well actually has milk and cheese. So I guess you could still make it vegetarian if you used vegetarian stock, vegetable stock. But basically, this is the big jar you can buy at Costco. Sam's probably carries it. I don't know. You can buy smaller jars at your regular grocery store. And basically, it's like chickeny paste. So you get 1 teaspoon of this plus a cup of water equals a cup of broth. So I never have to have random leftover bits of broth in my fridge because I only needed a half a cup or a cup and didn't use the whole thing. No, I just like spoon out of here what I need, throw in some water, and call it good. It's the best thing ever. Alright, this I can tell is getting warm. The oil's moving around. I can smell the oil. Okay, so we are going to throw in half of the cauliflower. Oh, hear the sizzle. You know your oil's hot. This recipe also calls for 4 whole cloves of garlic that you roast, so I'm just going to throw those in too. So again, you can see we kind of just have like a single layer of cauliflower. All the cauliflower is at least at some point touching the bottom of the pot. And we're just going to let it be for a minute. Again, we're kind of mimicking that roasting of trying to get some color on it, amp up the flavor a little bit. I was thinking about it, and you could totally like roast the cauliflower and then transfer it to the Instant Pot. But the regular recipe calls it only simmers for 15 minutes on the stove, so I don't know if it's a whole lot faster to do it in the Instant Pot. But again, the whole idea of you don't have to pay attention to it, you know, if maybe you got that going on. Or if you maybe need to leave it for a little bit, you could totally, like, because we're going to let it natural release, because if you try to quick release soup, it's a giant mess all over the place. But if you, so if you need to leave and come back to it, that would be totally fine too. Is if you're more comfortable with that as opposed to leaving like a pot of soup simmering on the stove. That's what you do. Okay, so we're gonna and this is going to take a couple of minutes, but that's alright. Okay, so maybe as you can see in the camera, we've got some brown splotchiness going on. That's what we're looking for. I can smell it. So the thing you don't want to do is stirring. You kind of want to like get it all in there,
Make sure all of it's kind of touching the bottom. Let it sit for a little bit. Stir it around. Kind of do that a couple times. So we did our 2 batches. And this part of my pot is not hot. Probably down there is, so please proceed with caution when picking up your insert. Alright, we're going to toss in just a little bit more olive oil, because we're going to saute in some onion. Everything is better with sauteed onion. And then I just kind of roughly chopped. We're going to puree this soup, so it's not hugely critical that my children find any bit of onion and they won't touch it, so. Okay. So the other things we're adding to this soup is a little bit of thyme, a little bit of rosemary, some salt and pepper, chicken stock, that's it. After we cook it, we are going to add a little bit of milk and a little bit of cheese, because that makes everything delicious. Puree it, we're going to call it good. So let me give this a stir. Alright, we're going to put our cauliflower back in, and then remember we've got our garlic cloves in there. Too worried about how chunky it is, because again, we're going to cook it in the Instant Pot, which is kind of going to obliterate it, and then we can puree it and that'll be fine. So we're going to put in some salt, some pepper, some bouillon. Guys, I don't ever measure. 4 teaspoons is a tablespoon plus some. It's good. Okay, again, I got hot water, at least warm water. We're going to pour this in. Going to give it a stir. Going to stir that bouillon in there. Alright, the original recipe says you're going to simmer it for 15 minutes. However, you've also roasted the cauliflower in the original recipe and it's at least halfway cooked through. So we got to do a little conversion here. We'll do that in a minute. Okay, lid. You can line up the arrows on the front, look at the thing in the back, twist it on. Venting valve, turn to sealing. Okay, and again, it's going to be all loose until it comes to pressure. As it comes to pressure, especially because there's a bunch of liquid in here, it's going to sputter. That's okay. It's normal. So it'll sputter. When it comes to pressure, your venting valve will lock in place, and the silver pin will come up locking the lid. Alright, so I'm going to push this, oh, okay, sorry. If you have it in saute mode, which we did, we have to turn it off before we can pick our next mode. I'm going to give it 8 minutes. Okay, so we're going to set our time for 8 minutes. The computer is going to wait a minute just to make sure it knows that you're done. It will then beep and say on. There it goes. Once it comes to pressure, on will change to the time that we selected, 8 minutes, and it will count down until it's done. Once it's done, we're going to let it natural release, which means we're going to leave it alone for about 10 minutes. And then if we still need to release some more pressure, we'll go ahead and finish releasing it, and then we'll finish the soup. So we'll be back in just a minute. Alright, we're back. So this, again, cooked for 8 minutes. It took about 7 minutes to come up to pressure. If you use, if you don't have hot water, it's probably going to take more like 10 minutes to come up to pressure, maybe a little more. Anyhow, cooked it for 8 minutes. We've been doing a natural release for 10 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and finish releasing the pressure. Like I say, if you had done this right from the get-go, it would be sputtering, spitting everywhere. Which, I guess if you're in a hurry, you can throw a towel over the top. It's not a huge deal. But I also wanted to give that cauliflower a little bit longer to cook, since we didn't roast it to start off the cooking. Oh, I can smell it. It smells good. It's going to take a minute. Come on. So I guess I can tell you what we're going to do next. We're going to stir in a little bit of milk,
some cheese. We're not doing that first. I forgot. So the recipe calls for we're going to puree it, and I forgot my stick blender over there, and I don't want to go get it. So you can either do it in multiple batches in just a regular blender, because it's going to be steamy hot. So another thing I've learned recently is make sure when you're tilting your lid, tilt it away from the venting valve. Because I have actually burnt myself recently because I kind of tilted the lid funny and the water will come out from the venting valve and then like run down your arm. It's really not very pleasant, so don't do that. Side note. Okay, back to what I was talking about. So pureeing. You can either do it in a blender. You're going to want to do it, ladle it carefully in multiple batches. Make sure you can kind of... So take the top, the little bit off the top of your blender and put a towel over it just because it's hot and it expands and you don't want it exploding. So that steam and heat needs someplace to escape to. I just want to show you, we're going to poke it with a fork here. Super soft, super tender, delicious, I'm sure. Okay. All right. I can mash it. I think also in the recipe, she calls for only pureeing part of it. So this is where it's your discretion. It depends on how chunky you want your soup. If you want it super smooth, obviously mashing it with the back of a spoon is not an ideal situation. Okay, so you're going to puree it for reals, either with a stick blender or with a regular blender. And then you're going to stir in some milk, you're going to stir in some cheese, let it melt, and it's done, and it's delicious. You know, taste it, add some salt and pepper if you need to. I'm sure if you wanted, you could squirt on some hot sauce if that's your thing. It's not my thing. No, not really. You could top it with some croutons, some bacon bits, because bacon, again, makes everything better, just like cheese and milk. And there you have it. So I am sorry to get out my stick blender to show you how, but you can finish it. I know you can. Because this really isn't what you're going for. Blend it at least a little bit so you've got a nice, cohesive, creamy soup, and then stir in your stuff, and it will be wonderful. So I hope maybe you learned something today about how to take a recipe that's not an Instant Pot recipe and adapt it. Soup's one of those things especially that's super easy because cook it a little more, it's not a big deal. I even still get a little nervous when I'm cooking meat sometimes because I'm like, I don't want to undercook it because I don't want raw chicken, but I want to overcook it because then it's dry and nasty. But soup, you definitely have more leniency. And again, so I'd say altogether, I mean, we took maybe 5 minutes prep, 7 minutes to cook, that's 12, well, plus 8, not to cook pressure, 8 minutes to cook, that's 20. So 30, 35, maybe 40 minutes max, and you got soup. You didn't have to turn the oven on. You only used one pot. Anyhow, I hope you give it a try. I hope this gives you some confidence after you do this to maybe if you have another favorite soup recipe to convert it to an Instant Pot recipe. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Feel free to like, subscribe, share with your friends, and we look forward to showing you something new next week.